At 68, T.D. Jakes, one of the most powerful voices in modern faith, faces a tragedy that no one saw coming. Behind the sermons, the megachurch lights, and the inspiring messages lies a heartbreak so profound it shakes the very foundation of his life and ministry. What happened next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the man who has preached hope to millions. This is a story of triumph, faith, and an unimaginable personal loss that's finally coming to light. For decades, T.D. Jakes has been more than just a pastor. He has been a symbol of hope, inspiration, and resilience for millions around the world. From his megachurch in Dallas to countless books and conferences, his life seemed like a story of unstoppable triumph. But behind the public persona, there's a chapter most have never seen. A tragedy, deeply personal and heart-wrenching, has quietly cast a shadow over the man who has spent his life helping others find light in their darkest moments. You won't believe the series of events that led to this moment. The challenges he faced weren't just professional, they cut to the core of his very being. In this video, we'll uncover the untold details, the struggles, the heartbreak, and the shocking truths that have remained hidden from the public eye. This is where it gets unbelievable. From private family battles to moments that tested his faith in ways no one could imagine, every revelation changes the way we see T.D. Jakes, not just as a pastor, but as a human being confronting unimaginable loss. By the end of this video, you'll understand the full scope of his journey and why at 68, the tragedy he faces goes far beyond anything we've seen in the public spotlight. But before we dive into the details, consider this. What if everything you thought you knew about his life was only part of the story? T.D. Jakes wasn't born into fame or fortune. In fact, his journey to becoming one of the most influential spiritual leaders of our time is a story of sheer determination, resilience, and faith tested in unimaginable ways. Born in South Charleston, West Virginia, Jakes grew up witnessing struggles that many of his congregants could relate to: poverty, broken family dynamics, and the weight of societal expectations. From a young age, he showed a natural gift for inspiring others, a voice that could uplift even in the darkest times. But this gift came with its own challenges. Many doubted his abilities, some criticized his style, and others simply couldn't see the man who would one day command audiences of tens of thousands. He faced rejection early on, not just professionally, but personally, a theme that would continue to shape his life. In the 1980s and 1990s, Jakes began building his ministry from the ground up. With nothing more than passion, vision, and a deep faith, he launched small gatherings that slowly grew into the megachurch we know today. His unique approach combined raw emotion with practical guidance, making spirituality accessible to millions. His message wasn't just about hope, it was about survival, transformation, and the belief that anyone, regardless of background, could rise above adversity. But behind the triumph, the public didn't see the strain. The long hours, the pressure of leadership, and the weight of being a spiritual role model took a toll. Friends and close associates whispered about the personal sacrifices he made. Some nights, he returned home exhausted, wrestling not just with sermons, but with the heavy burden of private family struggles that he rarely spoke about. And yet, the world saw only the stage, the lights, and the preaching that could move a crowd to tears. But what was happening behind closed doors was far more complicated and far more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. Just when it seemed his life was a story of unbroken success, a series of events would unfold, shaking him to his core. The kind of events that make even the strongest question everything they once held dear. And this is where the story takes a turn that few could have predicted. To the world, T.D. Jakes is a beacon of hope, a man whose words can heal, inspire, and transform lives. But behind the spotlight, behind the cameras and the applause, he has faced a deeply personal tragedy that few have ever been privy to. At 68, this chapter of his life is perhaps the most challenging, testing not just his faith, but his very humanity. Sources close to Jakes reveal that the tragedy began quietly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't a sudden scandal or a public failure. It was the accumulation of loss, heartbreak, and personal struggle that no amount of preaching could shield him from. Those who know him well say that even someone as charismatic and powerful as Jakes carries scars that the world cannot see. One of the most heartbreaking elements involves his family. Though he is known for his devotion to faith and community, Jakes's personal life has not been immune to pain. Reports suggest that health crises, emotional strain, and private battles within his family have taken an enormous toll on him. Nights once filled with prayer and reflection were now clouded by worry and grief. The man who counsels millions on hope and resilience found himself confronting questions that had no easy answers. How do you maintain faith when your world is quietly unraveling? How do you lead thousands when your own heart is breaking? What makes this tragedy even more powerful is the contrast between the public image and the private reality. On stage, he preached messages of strength, healing, and divine intervention. Off stage, he navigated situations that felt far more human, far more fragile, and far more heartbreaking than any sermon could ever capture. Friends, colleagues, and even some family members have spoken of long nights where Jakes would be alone, wrestling with despair in silence, never allowing the world to see the cracks. And yet, through it all, he continued to serve, he continued to inspire, he continued to stand in the spotlight. But behind every inspiring speech, every sold-out conference, and every tearful sermon was a man carrying the weight of a deeply personal tragedy, one that would change him forever. It was during this period that whispers of another shocking development began to surface, one that would not only shake Jakes's personal world, but would also ripple across the communities he had spent decades nurturing, the kind of revelation that would make even his closest supporters stop and ask, how did it come to this? And just when it seemed he might find a moment of peace, fate had another, far more devastating twist in store. The story takes a heart-wrenching turn when the full scale of T.D. Jakes's personal tragedy comes into focus. For a man whose life has been defined by uplifting others, this period revealed a vulnerability rarely seen in public. At 68, he was confronted with losses that cut deeper than any sermon or message could heal. Those close to Jakes describe it as a period of quiet devastation. It began with challenges in his immediate family, matters that were intensely private and emotionally overwhelming. Health crises, strained relationships, and unforeseen circumstances collided, leaving him in a position no one expected. Friends recount long nights where he wrestled with decisions that weighed heavily on his conscience. The very man who had spent decades guiding others through trials now faced an ordeal that challenged his faith and resilience in ways that were almost unimaginable. Perhaps the most shocking part of this tragedy lies in its secrecy. Unlike public controversies or scandals that grab headlines, this was a deeply personal journey, hidden from the public eye. Jakes, known for his transparency on spiritual matters, chose to shield the most painful aspects of his life from the world. Even his most devoted followers were unaware of the emotional storm he was navigating. Insiders revealed that the weight of this tragedy was so heavy that it affected more than just his personal life. It began to touch every facet of his ministry. Decisions that once seemed straightforward became fraught with emotion. Events and conferences were shadowed by the burden of private grief. Sermons that were meant to inspire now carried an undertone of raw, lived experience, as if the preacher himself was speaking from a place of deep, personal struggle. Yet, despite it all, Jakes continued to show up. He preached, he counseled, and he led his congregation with unwavering dedication. But behind every appearance was the haunting question: how does a man of faith endure when life's trials threaten to consume him entirely? And then, just when it seemed the world might never know the depth of his pain, another layer of tragedy surfaced, a revelation so shocking that even his closest allies were stunned. It was a moment that would redefine the way the public sees him, forcing everyone to confront the humanity behind the megachurch persona. What happened next would shake his legacy and leave a mark that could never be erased. And it's this moment, the one the world is only beginning to understand, that truly defines the heartbreaking chapter of T.D. Jakes's life at 68. For T.D. Jakes, 68 was supposed to be a year of reflection, of looking back on decades of ministry and influence with a sense of fulfillment. Yet, life had a different, far more painful path in store. Behind the polished stage, behind the powerful sermons, lay a series of events that revealed a heartbreak no one expected from a man who had inspired millions. At the core of this tragedy is a deeply personal loss, one that not only affected Jakes emotionally, but also shook the foundation of his family and ministry. Those close to him describe a period of intense struggle, marked by private confrontations, health scares, and the emotional toll of responsibilities that weighed heavily on his shoulders. It wasn't the kind of event that could be fixed with prayer alone. It was a combination of circumstances that challenged his faith, his resilience, and his very identity. Friends and insiders reveal that Jakes often retreated into solitude during this period. Late nights in the quiet of his study became moments of reflection, grief, and sometimes despair. The man who could command tens of thousands with his voice now wrestled with emotions that no crowd could soothe. The tragedy was multifaceted. There were elements of health concerns, strained relationships, and personal challenges that compounded to create a storm that few could imagine. One of the most shocking aspects of the story is the contrast between public perception and private reality. Fans see the strength, the charisma, the unshakable faith, but the man behind the ministry was human, vulnerable, and deeply affected by loss. Those who have walked closely with him during this period describe moments where Jakes was almost unrecognizable, quiet, introspective, and burdened by emotions he rarely shared. What makes this revelation even more compelling is the ripple effect it had on his ministry. Decisions that seemed routine, church expansions, media projects, and community initiatives, became intertwined with personal struggle. His team had to navigate not only the logistical challenges, but also the emotional weight that he carried silently. And yet, through it all, he persisted, maintaining the image of stability, compassion, and leadership that the world had come to admire. But even as he faced this tremendous heartbreak, a turning point emerged, a moment that would ultimately define his response to tragedy. It was not a miracle in the conventional sense, nor was it an easy solution. It was a revelation about resilience, faith, and the human capacity to endure in the face of overwhelming loss. And just when it seemed that he might finally find some semblance of peace, an unexpected development occurred, one that would leave even his closest confidants stunned. The very tragedy that had tested his faith and shaken his personal life was now about to reveal a truth so profound that it would change how the world sees T.D. Jakes forever. What happened next is a story of courage, heartbreak, and an indomitable spirit that refuses to be broken. But it's also a reminder that even the strongest among us are not immune to life's most devastating challenges. After the storm of tragedy struck, T.D. Jakes faced a crossroads, a moment that would test not only his faith, but his very essence as a leader, father, and human being. For someone whose life had been dedicated to inspiring millions, the challenge was now profoundly personal. How do you rise when the weight of private heartbreak feels unbearable? How do you continue to guide others when you yourself are struggling to stand? Sources close to Jakes describe a period of quiet reflection and reinvention. He began to rely not only on his faith, but on trusted friends, mentors, and family who could support him in ways that the public would never see. In these private moments, Jakes confronted the painful truths of his life, the losses, the strained relationships, the missed opportunities for connection, and began the slow, painstaking process of healing. What's remarkable is how he channeled this personal struggle into renewed purpose. Even in the midst of profound sadness, he found ways to serve, to preach, and to reach people with authenticity that was deeper than ever before. Sermons carried a new weight, a rawness that resonated with listeners in ways that perfection never could. Jakes' words now reflected not just theoretical hope, but the lived experience of someone who had walked through unimaginable darkness and found a way to emerge with renewed strength. Family and friends described small victories that gave him courage. A meaningful conversation with a loved one, a moment of laughter after weeks of silence. Each day became an opportunity to rebuild not only his personal life, but also the ministry that had always been at the center of his calling. What was once a private tragedy slowly transformed into a narrative of resilience, faith, and ultimate redemption. Yet even as he began to rise, there remained a lingering shadow. The knowledge that certain losses are permanent, that some wounds never fully heal. It's this balance of hope and grief, triumph and sorrow, that defines the most human part of T.D. Jakes. The world sees the megachurch, the books, the conferences, but behind it all is a man who has endured heartbreak, faced the unimaginable, and yet continues to lead with courage. And here lies the final truth of this story. Tragedy does not define him, but it has reshaped him. At 68, T.D. Jakes stands as a testament to the human capacity to endure, to find purpose, amidst pain, and to inspire others even when your own heart is heavy. His journey reminds us that even the strongest voices can carry quiet heartbreak, and that true strength is measured not by what the world sees, but by how we navigate the storms hidden from view. As we reflect on his story, we are left with a powerful lesson. Life can break us, but it can also teach us resilience, empathy, and a deeper understanding of faith. For millions of followers, this chapter of Jake's life is not just about tragedy. It is a reminder that even the most powerful leaders are human. And even in heartbreak, there is a path forward. And so TD Jakes continues, preaching, inspiring, and leading, not because life spared him from pain, but because he chose to rise through it. This is the story of heartbreak, resilience, and hope, a story that reminds us all that no matter how deep the sorrow, there is a way to move forward.